Hello and welcome to the Roundtable number 37. This is the Expat Experience, and I'm going to be discussing this topic with Alex Christoforou and Brian Berletic. Alex, it's a pleasure seeing you again, my friend. How's it going?
Great to see you, Gonzalo. Great to see you, Brian. Great to see everybody. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. And Brian, how's it going, man? How's Thailand doing?
Pretty good. Always sunny year round, and winter becomes very abstract as the years go by. So
Yeah, because like here in Kharkov, it is cold as balls. I mean, Jesus Christ, it's cold. And today we had like a blazingly sunny day, and it was like -2 degrees, and that's like warm, you know. And on some days, Jesus Christ, it really is just unforgivably cold. But anyway, the topic I wanted to discuss, because with Brian and Alex, we're talking, Ukraine 24/7, and it's exhausting. And I'm here in the damn country, and I find it exhausting. And so, I wanted to do something completely different, which is talking about the expat experience, because all three of us are expatriates from our respective countries. And it's really interesting because a lot of people are talking about leaving the West. I've been advocating it for quite some time because I thought that the socioeconomic conditions of the United States were deteriorating. And I just wanted to get into that particular topic and ask you. I mean, I don't want to pry into anybody's personal life, but I'm interested in each of you discussing why you're an expat and why are you living in the country you're living in now, and why did you decide to leave your former country? I mean, I'll start first. I mean, I'm from Chile, and Chile is, as Henry Kissinger once said very aptly, he said, it is a geopolitical dagger aimed at the heart of Antarctica. It is the most obscure place on the face of the planet. And I just felt, I grew up traveling around because of my parents' occupation. We lived for a while in Los Angeles. We lived in Ecuador, in New York, in Miami. And so as an adult, I just kept on. I had the wanderlust, the gypsy blood in me or something. And I just kept on wandering. And I've lived in a whole bunch of different cities. And it's just a wonderful experience, especially considering how life is short and the world is big. And I at least want to see as much of it as possible. And so that's really been my motivation. It hasn't been any grand plan or the notion of like, doing deals or finding better opportunities. No, it's been much more of a sense of just seeing more of the world. Brian, why did you decide to leave the States? I mean, I take it you're American, right?
yes,
I know that.
I'm a American, and I decided to leave the U.S. because I joined the U.S. military. I was extremely disillusioned by absolutely everything that I saw. I could see all the way back then. So this was around when I finally left the U.S. I was out of the Marines and I was getting out of the U.S. was 2004, and even then it was obvious what direction the U.S. was going in, and I wanted nothing to do with it. I could see their foreign policy, what they're doing to their allies, because I was never in a war zone. I was in Japan, the Philippines, Thailand for military exercises. We're stationed in Japan. And I just didn't like how the U.S. even treated their allies. And then this was as the U.S. had already invaded Afghanistan and was getting ready to invade Iraq. I wanted to be pretty much on the other side of the planet from the U.S. And Thailand kind of is like almost on the opposite side of the planet. So that is the reason why I decided to leave the U.S. I've been here for almost 20 years. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're. I mean, without giving anything away, you're married. You're totally established in Thailand. You speak Thai, and do you feel totally integrated?
No, I'm always going to be an outsider. I realize that I'm a guest here, and I'm okay with that. I'm okay with respecting other people, their way of doing things, and not trying to pretend that I belong here. I'm totally okay with that, and I imagine that's how maybe my ancestors, when they first came to America, the first Berletics in America, how they probably felt. They didn't really speak the language 100%, but maybe their kids would be the first generation to be really established there and integrated, as you say.
Yeah, because in my own case, yeah, I always feel that I'm a guest in whatever country I'm living in, and I'm always very careful not to get involved in the local politics, because it's sort of like when you go to visit somebody's house, you don't start commenting on mom and dad's fight. I mean, that's their problem. You just watch and keep your opinions to yourself. That's always been my way of thinking. What about you, Alex?
Well, I don't know if you would categorize me as an expat, to be quite honest.
Okay.
I come from a diplomatic family, so my father was a diplomat all his life. Started very low, eventually over 40 plus years, he ended up becoming an ambassador for Cyprus.
Mm-hmm.
So, I was born in the US. I've lived on the East Coast, New York, DC, moved to the West Coast as well. And my situation is interesting in that even if you're born and raised in the US, by law in the United States, you are not considered a US citizen. If you're born under a diplomat, if you're born under a diplomatic family.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not giving any citizenship. It's as if you're born in Cyprus, for example.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the way you're categorized. So we've lived in when I was young, we lived in Mexico. Mm-hmm. I think that was my first experience of living outside of the United States when I was just a kid. And at first I thought it was going to be awful. And then it was the best experience of my life. I mean, really? I ended up really, really loving Mexico and Mexico City a lot.
How old were you by the time?
I went there when I was like 11,
mm-hmm.
11, 12. And I left when I was like 15, 16. But I mean, I loved it. And my whole family, my brothers loved it. Everyone loved it. I mean, it was just like the best experience ever. And we thought it wasn't going to be so good coming from the US. We thought, okay, we're getting transferred to Mexico. God, what's that going to be like? And it was awesome. And I think after,
why was it so good?
Hard to say, Gonzalo. I just really I liked the freedom of it. Mm-hmm. I liked the people. Just the vibe. The vibe was just very different than the US. And I love the US, but it was just it was a different kind of experience. And it was just a lot of fun. I think it was more free. I mean, being a kid in Mexico seemed like you were a lot more free than being a kid in the United States. You were taking public transport around everywhere, and I don't know. You just felt more adult-like. I think as a young, like a middle schooler or teenager, I felt like I was a lot older than I actually was. That was the experience that I got from Mexico. It seemed like you were more mature living in Mexico than the US. So that was just my own personal experience. But after that, it just kind of stuck with me to just, when I have the chance to see as much of the world as I can. And when I was living in Arizona at the time, all my friends, they started to move to different cities. And one of my best friends went to Brazil. Another one of my friends moved back to New York. And I was like, it's time to go back to Greece and Cyprus and Moscow. And I just started, moving to different places. And I'm Cypriot. So, living in Cyprus is kind of like being home, but it's kind of not, because I never went to school there. I didn't grow up there. I don't have a group of friends that I grew up with in Cyprus at all. So I'm Cypriot, but I'm also kind of a stranger in that country as well, in a way. And for Greece, Greece and Cyprus are close culturally, but they are two different countries. So living in Greece, you feel like you're Greek to a certain extent, but you're also an outsider as well. So, I mean, I feel very American, but I really absorbed a lot of the different experiences that I've had. And I lived in Moscow for a while as well. Actually, I did 2 stints in Moscow. One when my family was there, when it was the Soviet Union. And,
cool.
Yeah. And
do you
I was actually,
that? How old were you?
I was actually that summer. I was very young, but I was in August when it changed over, when everything collapsed and it changed over from the Soviet Union to Russia. That August, I remember that entire incident. I mean, I was there. I was walking through Red Square, and I remember seeing everybody, all these people out on the streets carrying these flags, these blue, white, red flags, and I'm like, what what is this thing? What's going on here? I'm like, I didn't know. I was just a little kid. I didn't know what anything was, what was going on. And remember, I got home and my mother was like, "The Soviet Union's no more. It's now Russia."
Jesus.
And I'm like, "Okay, what does that mean?" She's like, "We don't know. We'll see." That was it. Yeah. And then I lived in Moscow a few years ago, like in
As an adult.
2017 to like 18, 19. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was great. That was a great experience. Yeah.
And I mean, you were a child, when you saw the Soviet Union collapse. Yeah. But what was the difference? I mean, how did it feel in terms of vibe? Or you didn't really have a point of comparison?
I loved it. I loved it when I was. I mean, I would go there, and I would just do like 3 to 4 month stints, because back then they didn't have a school for. They had a school for an American school there, but it was for very, very young, like grade school. So I could only go there in the summers and during holidays. So I would go there for 3 or 4 months, and then I would go back to the U.S. and I actually stayed in a boarding school for a time period. But I went there for 3 years on and off, and I loved it. The Soviet Union, and then the year after when it was Russia, was fascinating.
Yeah,
it was. I guess when you're young, you kind of adapt to everything.
Yeah.
When you're a kid, it's easy to adapt.
Yeah.
Big difference though, going back and living there in 2017, 18. I mean, it's probably one of the most modern cities I've ever been to. I mean, light years ahead of what I experienced in Greece or Cyprus, or at times even the US.
Oh yeah. In terms of like the US, comparing Moscow today or a couple of years ago, and to any big city in the States. I don't know which is the last big city you lived in the States.
San Francisco.
Okay, that's a great point of comparison. Which one is better and why? And what's going on in Moscow that you're like, wow, they don't have this in San Francisco?
Moscow's a really nice walking city.
Mm-hmm.
I really like it. It's really nice to walk around and absorb things. It's easy to get around.
Mm-hmm.
It's really easy to get around. Moscow's like the biggest city I've ever lived in that feels like it's a small town.
Really?
I mean, it's a huge city, but it feels like, I'm living in a small town, and I can get to pretty much anywhere within 15 minutes, 15, 20 minutes. It's really efficient. And just really modern. People were really, really nice. I just thought it was very comfortable. It was a very comfortable transition, a very easy transition. I didn't have a hard time with anything really. Living in Moscow, it was a very smooth transition, very
also,
wired.
You speak Russian, right?
I learned Russian when I was there, and I'm at the point of conversational now.
Oh, okay. You didn't know when you were a kid, you didn't pick it up?
No, I mean, I picked up some. I knew some words, but then when I was a kid, I forgot it, and I just went on with my life. And then when I went back to Moscow, I knew some words, the basic words. Хорошо, как дела? These just the basic everyday words. But then I started to really take it seriously, and I'm okay now. I think I can converse and understand and stuff like that. But if you live in the center of Moscow, I think it's important to try and learn the language. But it's, at least when I was there, it's pretty easy to get around with English as well.
Really?
Yeah. In the center.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's more sophisticated. I mean, and more international because of trade and diplomacy and whatnot, right?
Yeah.
No, I'm incredibly curious about Moscow because frankly, once this conflict ends, I want to go to Moscow because I just want to see it, and experience it for a while. Because in my own case, because in my own case, what's happened over the last decade of my life is that I started sort of hopscotching between cities. I lived for a stint in Paris, another stint in London, another in Amsterdam, another in Germany, and in Kharkov. And yeah, one of the things I realize is that when you have this kind of expat life, even in your home country or what's supposed to be your home country, like Cyprus is for you, Alex, you don't feel at home. You feel a bit like an outsider. and it's a little unnerving because you say to yourself, well, I'm supposed to be from this country, but I'm really not. And also what happens too is that because you have so many points of comparison with the experiences that you've had rather, you sort of like say, oh, they're doing this and it's not as cool as in some other place that they're doing the same thing or something similar, or this is like a real problem that I don't have back in the other place. I mean, you become a hell of a lot more critical. I mean, hasn't that happened to you, Brian, that you look back on the States now with your experiences overseas and you're like, oh man, the Americans really aren't doing things properly?
I mean, as the years go by, I just feel, much better about my decision. I mean, there are a lot of things. I miss family and friends. They come.
I'm still here.
And they come and visit.
Yeah.
From time to time. But I miss that. And American people themselves, they're not bad people. And
Oh, no.
certain places you go in the United States can be very nice. But just I think like it's on a principle level. I don't want to be I don't want to be contributing to anything there. I don't want to be involved in anything there. And in terms of building a future, I have family still in the U.S. They tell me how things are getting progressively more and more difficult. They work hard. They see nothing coming from how hard they're working. Everything is crumbling around them. These politicians talk and they don't have an actual tangible vision of what they're going to do or where they're going to lead everybody. Everything are these ambiguous slogans and ideas. And so, you get into, say like here in Thailand or Asia in general, people are focused on development. You can see tangible results, roads, bridges, train lines, mass transit. Here in Bangkok, it's very easy to get around and clean, and you feel safe too. And I didn't really feel that way, say like in New York City. I never really felt that way traveling around there. So, I mean, and I've had this experience pretty much everywhere else I've traveled to. I've been in Singapore for a while. I've traveled through Japan since getting out of the military. I've been through China, and everywhere else I've gone, everything seems better organized. Things are progressing, and in the U.S., it just feels like they're tired, and things are just unraveling slowly but surely. You don't see the focus and the like a combined collective push forward. You just don't see it. And when I was growing up is in the 80s and 90s, and it seemed like at that time they did have that, and it's just faded. It's just faded over the years.
Can I ask Brian what area, if it's okay, what area in the U.S. are you from?
I was born and lived for like half my childhood in New York, just like about an hour north of the city. My dad was actually a police officer very close to the city, and then we moved to Pennsylvania, and it's like central Pennsylvania, kind of in the middle of nowhere, and it was quite a contrast between New York and Pennsylvania. It was very rural, and people had a different mindset there.
Yeah, one time I took a car all the way from Connecticut, and I drove all the way through Pennsylvania, like the whole thing through it. That was awesome, actually. It's really beautiful when you drive through all of. Yeah, it's a beautiful state. Yeah,
the United States itself, just because the last time I was there, I traveled. I didn't want to fly, so I traveled by train, boat, and bus, pretty much all the way back to Thailand. And I traveled by Amtrak all the way across the U.S. I mean, it is a beautiful country, has tremendous natural beauty.
Yeah, and that's one of the things it's very depressing about the United States with all the highways and the road systems. The cities are incredibly ugly compared to other cities everywhere in the world. And the city I hate the most is Los Angeles. Good God, that's just a sea of concrete, and it's so alienating and depressing. The architecture is just horrible. And that's one of the things that strikes me about the United States, that when you're growing up there, you don't kind of realize it, how the architecture influences your mood so much. And you're in one city. I remember living in Paris. I was living there in 2011 and 2012. And I was living in central Paris, right around the corner from the Madeleine Church in the 9th arrondissement, and just down the street from the opera, right? And everything is so formal, so elegant, that all of a sudden I found myself just dressing up more elegantly. I mean, I didn't have any place to go, but it was sort of like the architecture was influencing me, making me feel like tidier. You see what I'm saying? And when I'm in LA, everything is so detached. Everything is just boxes surrounded by these moats of concrete that are supposed to be roads, quote unquote, but you can't walk them, even though they have a sidewalk. It's limitless practically, and it's so depressing, and it feels alienating contrasted to Paris or Amsterdam, which is like the coziest city in the world. You just feel comfy just walking around it, and that's the thing that I find dispiriting about the United States, because it's physically, apart from the cities, of course, it's so beautiful. It is such a lovely country. And I don't quite understand it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I mean, it depends where you go. Say like in the Northeast, there's a lot of really old architecture there, and you kind of it kind of has a very unique feeling and atmosphere. And I mean, I grew up there, and I still remember it had a character all of its own. I know exactly what you mean about Los Angeles. I want to talk a little bit about Amtrak going across the United States, because
sure.
Alex is talking about how easy it is to get around in Moscow. The train was 4 hours late to pick me up in Pennsylvania, and it was 12 hours late. I think it was like Oakland. I think I went to Oakland, and very near San Francisco. And they would stop in the middle of the desert. I don't know exactly, maybe Utah or something. We're in the middle of nowhere. The train just stops. They turn everything off, and they say, everyone just, if you want to get some fresh air, it's going to get kind of stuffy in here. Just go outside. So we're all standing outside in the desert. And we're like, why are we doing this? And they said, well, we have to wait for the freight trains to go by. And we were out there for like an hour. And they said, it didn't used to be like this, but this is just the way it is. And they almost seemed embarrassed as they were telling us about
what
this.
year was this, by the way?
I think it was like 2006 or 2007. And so could you imagine, I get to Oakland. It's very close to San Francisco. I got a hotel for like a day because I had to go on the boat the next day. And all night I don't know what was going on outside. People were fighting. I saw broken furniture being thrown out of a window. I pushed a bed up against the door because I didn't know what was going on. It's very difficult to get some sleep. And then when you get on the boat and you're leaving, you're like, good riddance. It's just I don't know what happened. There's no order. There's no cohesion. People just are all on their own programs, and it's very strange. And then I went from there to Tokyo. And once you're in Tokyo, I mean, it's like you traveled 50 years into the future. And I got on the bullet train to Osaka. It's exactly on time. It's exactly on time.
The minute.
Versus 4 hours. Yeah, 4 hours late picking you up, and 12, half a day late dropping you off. I mean, it's such a stark contrast. And then when I got to China and went from Shanghai to Kunming by train, again, it was on time. This was before they had the high-speed rail network. But it was on time, and it was comfortable, and everything was working. And there was no point where we had to stop and give way for freight trains, because they had enough lines to do both. I don't understand why the United States had the potential to have the greatest of everything, and yet what does it actually have? It's depressing. It really is.
Yeah, it's like they didn't pay attention to the infrastructure. Chat, by the way, and for those of you just joining, this is like a comfy stream. If you're looking for deep geopolitical insights, you're just going to have to catch Alexander Mercouris, because we're just hanging out and just talking about the expat experience. But anyway, going back to the States, that's the thing, in the last like 20 odd years, it's sort of like the infrastructure of the United States was just allowed to go to seed. Because, I remember in the 90s, things, like Amtrak, I remember taking I took the Acela train, from New York to Washington and back. but it ran on time. I mean, it was kind of dirty, and New York City subway is horrifying, you know.
Yeah.
But okay, fine, you know. But you know, the contrast between then and now. I mean, I haven't been in the last time I visited the States was in 2019, but I haven't lived in the United States since 2001. But even in that trip in 2019 and a few others I've taken before then, I could see like the steady decline of the basic infrastructure, and that I found truly shocking. That there was this. There were these bright, shiny towers or hotels or squares. I remember back in the 90s, I would go to the Gramercy Park Hotel in New York, which was like, at the time, was kind of like a seedy hotel. Not seedy per se, but like low rent kind of thing, you know, like a 2-star hotel, you know. And they revamped it, and it's gorgeous. But, you know, you have this gorgeous hotel in the middle of the city that is just sort of like collapsing, you know. And it was just, it's deeply disheartening. I don't know if you've experienced the same, Alex.
I don't know. I'm trying to think if I felt that way when I was like living in the U.S. I didn't really pay much attention, to be honest, about like the transport and stuff until I lived outside of the U.S. Like when I was in the U.S. and even Mexico, I didn't think about it. But then when I started to travel around Europe, that's when I really started to think about a city planning and what it means to walk around a city and the metro systems and all that stuff. When I was growing up in the U.S. or living in the U.S., I just never thought about that. I always just thought you get in a car, you go somewhere. If you're in New York, you get in the subway. It is what it is. I didn't think, you know, there could be subways like the subway in Moscow or something like that, which is like a museum. It never came to me. I never thought about that stuff. It is what it is, and you know, I'm going to use it, and that's that. And if I was living in DC or even when I went and moved to Arizona, it was just you get in your car and you go somewhere, and that was it. So I think it was once I started to spend more time in Europe, and then when I would go back to the U.S., that's when I would think, okay, this is a different way of city planning and doing things, and that's when I started to realize, okay, there's some differences here. I mean, you know, I always think of the U.S. as a car country. Not all the cities are like that, but I always think of it as, you know, the car is central to your life. In Europe, you know, okay, Cyprus is a small island. You need a car, but in Greece, I couldn't imagine having a car. There are people that love their car here, but I couldn't. I could imagine having a car, even in Moscow. A lot of people have their cars in Moscow, but for me, I was like, why? Why? You have everything you need with the metros and walking the buses. You know, I think my perspective changed when I started to live outside the U.S.
That's the same.
Go ahead,
go
please,
ahead.
Brian. No,
well, I was
Brian.
going to say, I mean, it's the same in Bangkok. I mean, the traffic is notorious. I've never seen traffic worse than in Bangkok. And, you know, they have mass transit and it grows every single year. They open new lines, new stations. It's so easy to get a taxi when they started using all these different apps. I mean, you can get a taxi anywhere, anytime. You really don't need a car, and the driving is insane. And the only time you would need a car is if you kind of lived a little bit outside of the city, or like way outside the city. But even if you're just traveling from like one place to the other, the trains here are actually pretty nice, and they're building high-speed rail right now, and that is going to improve it. But it's already pretty nice, and I traveled on the train here quite a bit.
If you don't mind my asking, Brian, I don't want you to be indiscreet. You know, there's no such thing as an indiscreet question. There are only indiscreet answers. And so I'm asking, are you living in Bangkok or outside of Bangkok or some other area altogether?
Well, it's, you know, Bangkok is huge. It's huge, and there's areas that are technically not Bangkok, but I mean, if you, by all intents and purposes. So so I'm somewhere in there. I'm not like right in the center. But I had been for a while, not in the direct center, but kind of near like one of the main districts. And yeah, you're like walk 5 minutes to the subway station. Why would you ever want a car and deal with that traffic? Makes no sense at all.
Yeah. No, like in Santiago, for instance, Santiago is a big city, and what happens when you're living in Santiago, you do need a car because a lot of people live in the suburbs, but they've been expanding the metro, relentlessly over the years. And it's fairly efficient. And of course, there are buses and taxis. I mean, just raise your hand and a taxi will stop immediately. So it's not that big of a deal, or at least when I was living there. But the traffic is a bit of a nightmare because it's just a big city and everybody wants to be there for opportunities and the usual reasons. But what I kind of like miss and enjoy are walkable cities, of being able to just walk around, as opposed to having to get on a car for a carton of milk. That was the thing that I found so depressing. Right after university, I lived in Los Angeles, and I remember thinking to myself, I have to go a mile for basic groceries, the most basic groceries imaginable. Okay, because in every other city in the world that I've lived in, you have the residential area. I mean, they're all mixed use areas. You have residential and you have small shops of whatever sort. Sometimes, of course, the shop that you need is inconveniently located, might be a bit of a distance, a metro stop away or something, or a bus stop away. But it's manageable, it's walkable, right? But in the States, that's something that, living outside of the United States, I realize this is the wrong approach, of having completely segregated neighborhoods where it's just houses, no business of any sort whatsoever, and they don't allow it because of the regulations there, the zoning regulations. Yeah. And so you just want to it's the middle of the night, you ran out of milk, no big deal, but you have to get in a car, and I just find it just alienating, I think, is the word for me. I think that's the thing that happens to me insofar as living in the United States, because we were talking a bit about American people, and I honestly think that American people are salt of the earth. I have never, in all the places I've traveled to, met friendlier people. I haven't been to Asia, but Americans and Canadians are the friendliest people that I've had the opportunity to meet. The French are assholes by definition, right? And the Brits are all on their way. And the Dutch are very, very friendly too, but sort of like aloofly friendly. I mean, they sort of like keep you at a distance. Americans are so welcoming. You move into a new building, a condo or wherever, or a new neighborhood, and your neighbors are going to pop in, say hi, introduce themselves, and genuine. It's not fake. And so that's the thing I find very dissonant between the architecture that is so alienated, and yet the people are so welcoming. And I find it hard to square that particular circle. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah. And I mean, yeah, you have to get it like that. That is true. And I find that quite a contrast. In the US, you have your zoning laws, and it is whatever it is. And there's no leeway. Like here in Thailand, I wouldn't say that it's lawless, but it's very flexible. They don't care. As long as you're not bothering anybody, you can do anything. So if you live in a village, like a planned village, you have people running businesses right out of their front door. And so you don't have to. You could go get your coffee from your neighbor, and they could make a buck doing it. In the US, yeah, you have to get into your car and you have to do a little bit of driving, especially if you're in a rural area. You got to do a little bit of driving in the middle of the night to get whatever that thing is you ran out of.
Yeah. But insofar as the expat experience, what I've noticed too, of living in different countries where I'm a stranger, is that there's always that expat community, this sort of like very insular group of people who are living in some country, some fascinating country. And oddly enough, they want nothing to do with that country. I mean, they even shop at American food stores, and it's bizarre. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you have that everywhere. Yeah, you have those expats. in every country you have the expat communities. You have online, you have sites that cater to that as well, and bring people together. But I think you need both. I think if you're gonna leave the country that you're living in, I guess in this case we're probably talking, say you're living in the United States and you're gonna move outside of the United States. I think it's good to meet and hang out with people in the destination country, but it's also good to have friends and to know people who are, say, from the U.S. I mean, obviously there's a comfort there, and there's there's a lot that ties you together as well. So I think if you can find the right balance of both, to be part of that expat community, but also to be part of that country, to integrate more into that country, I think you kind of get the best of both worlds.
Yeah, Brian. I mean,
unfortunately here in Bangkok, I wouldn't touch the expat community with a 10-foot pole, because most Westerners that come here, as far as I can tell, they've come here for all the wrong reasons, and I would say relatively recently, it's actually quite a story. So relatively recently, many more Chinese tourists have been coming to Thailand, and it has been reconfiguring the entire tourism industry. More tourists come from China than all Western countries combined. And so people are not interested in what really Western tourists, because they come in smaller numbers. They're interested in certain things. And that had been fading.
What are they?
I think people know there's like the remnants of the R&R from the Vietnam War. So they had all these girly bars, and I guess it was quite a bit of them many years ago. But they've been these areas have been shrinking. The businesses become fewer in numbers. So they're like being converted into restaurants, and I don't think that it was ever a major component of the tourism industry to begin with. I can't see how it was, but it's one of those things where it becomes a stereotype. That's the thing that people remember. When you have a country of 60, 70 million people, they just remember about this one road in a city of like 12 million people. That's what they will remember. And because a lot of the tourists going here and then going back, that's what they came here for. So that's what they're going to talk about when they get back. The expat community here is mostly, of the Westerners, mostly people who came for that. And that gets boring, I guess, after a while, because they came here, they were going to these places. The women working in these places are obviously not interested. They're like 18, 19, 20-year-old girls. They're not interested in like a 60-year-old self-propelled stomach. They have a real boyfriend their age. They're just trying to get money, and so they flatter them. But these guys, they think that this is for real, and it goes to their head, and then they think everyone in the country finds them incredibly interesting and irresistible. So they'll leave this one little tiny road, and they'll go somewhere else to like 7-Eleven and try to hit on the cashier there, and she's grossed out. And then they start to realize, what this is all really about. They don't go back to wherever they came from. They insist on staying here, and they get this growing resentment because people here are not impressed with them being Westerners. They don't see them as being superior. They're not interested in their ideas that they feel compelled to share with everyone around them about how things should be done. And it just becomes more and more bitter, and greater and greater resentment. You see, these are the people that get involved in the politics here in Thailand. When there's like a Western-backed mob, these are the guys that are always getting involved and getting behind it, because they have this resentment where they just want to see everything trashed and ruined. It's you could probably, if you're a psychologist, write a thesis on this, because I've seen so many examples of people like this. And it's always the same exact pattern. There's some real pathology taking place here in this community. Yeah.
I mean, these are the guys who get behind. I mean, you're talking basically expats who are sex tourists who wound up sort of like getting stuck in Thailand with nothing better to do with their lives. and they're stewing in their resentment, and then they start
Yeah.
getting involved with NGOs and financing them or helping them in some
Well, no,
way or
yeah.
other.
Well, these are kind of low level people. They'll show up at the protests and get involved and make a scene. They will like try to get involved adjacent to the media and get involved that way. So sometimes it is the media and they're like these type of tourists all wrapped up in one. So yeah, it's a very unpleasant community. I'm sure that there's Americans and Europeans here who are not doing any of that. But they keep to themselves, kind of like me, I guess, and they just stick to the people around them where they are. And like for me, it's pretty much all Thai people are around where I am. So I never really interact with other Westerners.
Yeah, and so far as when I was about 10 years old, I lived in Ecuador. My father was transferred there because of some business dealings, and we lived in a very insular community of expats, only expats. Even the neighborhood was all expats. And, there was an expat school. It was the American school. I lived in Guayaquil. And it was the expat school. And there was like a country club whose name I've forgotten. That was like the upscale Ecuadorians, and I'd say half of it upscale Ecuadorians and half were foreigners. And it was expensive for the average Ecuadorian to be a member of this country club, I remember. And the expat community was a little bit paranoid, and they tended to hire security people. And it was very, very insular, and I didn't particularly care for it. I thought it was kind of creepy because I felt like I was sort of like part of, retrospectively, at the time I was far too young to understand such things. But retrospectively, I realized I felt as if I were part of some sort of invading army or some colonial satrapry of some sort. It was deeply creepy, and because of the nature of my father's business at the time, he was kind of like hated by a lot of Ecuadorians. Because he was considered, even though he was Chilean and with a Spanish first and last name, he was considered like some sort of invader, some sort of American agent, and he was not liked at the time. But again, this was 1978, okay, and this is decades ago. I have the sense that has sort of like diminished, but there's still, I think, that underlying resentment of the foreigner in most countries of the global South, if you will, outside of Western Europe. In Western Europe, you're just some random, foreigner. But like in Chile, like I never had anything to do with the expat community there. Why would I? I was Chilean, and I have Chilean friends, and I went to high school in Chile, and all the rest of it. But that expat community was sort of like considered the untouchables, that you didn't really want to be involved with them in any kind of way. And it's very interesting because it's sort of like a modern colonialism, and yeah, well, we're sort of like seeing the end of that neo-colonialism that we've been seeing in the last 50 years.
Well, I have a question for both of you, really, because here I am in Asia, and I feel like Westerners here come here with a massive sense of superiority, and it's always on display. It is obnoxious. Thai people are super friendly and laid back, and they're extremely patient with people like this. They when you cross a line, you will realize they're not saying anything because they feel like they can't. They're just being extremely patient because when you upset them, then they realize that they're guests here. But I'm just wondering, expat communities, say somewhere in Europe or in Latin America, do they have this same sense of superiority where it's almost a problem? Like here, it's definitely a problem. And you see them go into a place and they're yelling at them because they can't speak English. It's like, this is Thailand. They speak Thai,
Why the hell are you speaking Thai in Thailand? What the hell's the matter with you?
I've seen this.
I saw American.
I saw an American in a forum asking people to please translate this little card he wanted to carry around that says, "I'm an American. I only follow American laws." in Thailand. This is how out of their mind these people are. So I'm just wondering, like, Alex, any of the expat communities that you're, involved in or familiar with?
I don't think so. I haven't seen it much in Greece, at least. Actually, I'll say if you go like to the Greek islands in the summer, you'll get that. But you'll get people from all over the place, and everyone's drinking, and it depends on the island you go to, obviously. But say you go to one of these party islands, then yeah, things can get kind of crazy there. But I would say in Athens, for the most part, no, I think everyone is pretty chilled out. I mean, I haven't seen much of arrogance from any country, whether it's Russia or the U.S. or China. And we get tourists from all. Well, we used to get a lot of Russian tourists, not anymore because of the sanctions. But when we were getting a lot of Russians in Athens and Americans and English and Chinese, I think they were all pretty. They seemed like they were all respectful. They were coming. They were seeing the sights. There's a lot of Greece is very English oriented, and over the years with all the tourism from Russia and China, you started to see a big push as well to be very Russian and Chinese oriented as well. So I mean, you would go to restaurants and they would actually have people who would speak Russian or Chinese as well. So they really started to focus over the last decade on these segments for tourism as well. So for the most part, I would say that whenever I would hear English being spoken, if I was out and I would hear, people speaking English and they were from the States, I'd love to strike up a conversation, because it's like, oh, where are you from? Oh, okay, well, I grew up in New York and DC. Oh, okay, that's cool. You've been there, and it was kind of, it was good for me too, because it reminded me of the U.S. It brought back warm feelings of the U.S. as well. So, but I think that Greece is maybe a bit of an outlier with that as well, Brian. I mean, I think the tourism here is, or the expats that are living here, I think for the most part, they're not here for the reasons that many go to Thailand for.
Yeah.
I mean, I think So I think it's a different crowd.
Yeah, here it's also interesting. I would say also over the last 10 years, all of the signs when I first got here, if they weren't in Thai, they would be in English or Japanese. Now, all of the signs are being switched over to Mandarin, and there's a lot of. I mean, I think Russian. If you count Russia as a Western country, it's the largest amount of tourists come from Russia here to Thailand. So it's very interesting watching that transformation. And I just want to impress upon people, because people ask me, have you seen that movie? There was this movie, it was, what was it? Hangover. And they always ask me about this. I never really watched it, but that is a stereotype. That is not what 99% of Thailand is like. It is a real country with industry, agriculture, all kinds of things going on here. That is a tiny, tiny percentage of even the tourist industry, especially now that you have tourists coming from China and also from the rest of Southeast Asia. That is the second largest number of tourists actually come from the rest of Southeast Asia. So it's important for people to understand that.
I think Hollywood has definitely put forth a certain image for Thailand, which is hard for a lot. Even myself, I think about Thailand, and most of the times I get this Hollywood hangover. It's actually Hangover Part 2.
Okay. You watch them. Oh man. My appreciation of you has fallen.
I'm not that sophisticated. That's Alexander adds the sophistication. I'm the meat and potatoes guy. No, that you get that caricature, that image of Thailand, and I think that's the image that you get from Hollywood, though. But that image, Brian Gonzalo, it influences people to go to Thailand because they think that's what they're going to find there.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember that movie. The Beach, where Leo DiCaprio goes to Thailand, and it's like a hippie paradise. That's not real. That's just Hollywood bullshit.
Yeah.
When they come
what?
here looking
What?
for that, that's when the resentment starts to spin. I don't know why they don't go back, because they hate Thailand so much. I hate this. I hate the government is horrible. The streets are horrible. The people are horrible. Then why are you here? Go back to whatever rock you climbed up, out from under. Go back there. But they don't. They just, I
Is
don't
it
know.
cheap?
I don't know if they don't have enough
Is it?
money to get. It
Yeah.
used to be, but not anymore, because that's something they're also complaining about, because there's so much development in Thailand. They're actually upset and they want to reverse it, because they really enjoyed having that, the buying power of the euro or the dollar, which is diminishing. They're upset that people, they have real jobs, they have business, they have interests, that they're not interested in some dumpy old tourists. No one is. They just really, really upset. They also passionately hate China, because they can see China is rising. It's rising. The rest of the region is rising up with it. They resent that, because this was supposed to be their playground, and they were supposed to be carried along in whatever those things are.
In
You know what I'm talking about?
Or
Yeah.
I don't know
Whatever
what it
it's
is, but yeah, I know.
called.
Yeah. Well, I think that basically they thought to themselves, "Hey, I'm American. We're on top of the world. I'll go to Thailand, to this backwater. I'll enjoy myself with these teenage girls who seem to be so friendly to me." And all of a sudden they're like, "Oh, now we're number two. Now it's the Chinese guys that all the teenage girls are flocking to, in these red light districts or whatnot." And yeah, they're resentful. They don't feel that they are the representative of the dominant power anymore. Perhaps
Actually, the Chinese tourists come here with their families, and they go to
like
there's all
family
of these
stuff.
massive restaurants that are popping up, and I mean it's unreal, the scale. And they go shopping, and there has always been a ton of shopping in Bangkok, especially. And so they just come through, and during this whole COVID thing, I mean, people were really missing the Chinese, because they were becoming a fixture of the city, part of the city, and then they disappeared. And they're also upset because the money's disappeared, but they started to become a part of it. And then of course, because it's Asia, there's always has been a Chinese influence over the rest of Southeast Asia anyway. So it's all makes sense. And this period of time where you had Westerners here and kind of lording over everything, that was quite artificial, and it's on its way out. And there's a lot of people again really resentful over that.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, yeah, you're no longer the belle of the ball. It's sort of like inevitable. And what's interesting is you're telling me that the Chinese, they go there in families, not as individual lone tourists looking for God knows what. Is that's
yeah,
the case,
it's
right?
mostly. I can't say that there aren't any. I'm sure that there are, but the vast majority, they come on group tours. They're with their families, and this is a family thing. And I think also their movie industry also had a movie about Thailand, but it was actually a very positive one, and it made people want to come here. I don't know what it was about or anything, but that's the impression I get. So it was kind of the same process, but not really. And I think people appreciate them more, because when a lot of Chinese people that come here and kind of stay here as expats, they really take a lot of time to learn the language, which is something most Westerners don't. A lot of people are always shocked when I can speak even a little bit of Thai with them. They're quite shocked, because most Westerners have no interest. They could be here for like 10, 20 years and they don't speak a single word of Thai, which I think is highly disrespectful, honestly, if you're going to be here for that long. Yeah.
Yeah. And, in my own case, oh, by the way, it's something that, on the fringe of my mind, the notion of going as a tourist somewhere and just going shopping, never understood that. Why on earth would you go to some strange place and buy crap to haul back home when you can get the same crap back home, probably cheaper? I mean, God, you always hear about that leather jacket that somebody bought in some foreign country that was like 10 times more expensive than what they could have gotten. Never understood that. But anyway, that's just a trivial comment that I wanted to make. But no, the thing, I mean, like, look, it's sort of like inevitable that we're going to talk about the geopolitics of the situation. Do you think that the Western diplomats are kind of like transmitting this fact that the Chinese are?
I didn't hear what Gonzalo said. He kind of froze.
Yeah, I think he's breaking up for me too. Are you there, Gonzalo? No.
Complete his sentence. What do you think he was going to say?
I think he was going to ask you about the Western diplomats, if you think they're spreading some sort of stereotype about the Chinese in Thailand, or the Chinese tourists. I think that's what he was going to ask. I guess the influence of the embassies and the Western embassies, which is a serious topic.
Is that a problem there where you're at, Alex? Do you see this?
Yeah, it's huge. I mean, we just came off of a 5-year stint with Jeffrey Pyatt as ambassador to Greece. You know, the Jeffrey Pyatt of Victoria Nuland, ring ring, hello Jeffrey, F the EU,
fame,
ambassador of Ukraine Pyatt, and after Ukraine, he was actually rewarded. That was why he came to Greece, because Greece is seen, at least from the U.S. diplomacy side of things, Greece is seen as a reward destination. You know, if you're in diplomacy, you have hardship posts, and you have posts which are considered to be a reward for the work that you've done. And so, for example, my father was in the Soviet Union, which at that time was considered a hardship post. And then after the Soviet Union, he was transferred to Athens, which was considered, you know, I don't want to say a cushy. It's a reward post. It's an easier post. And so when Pyatt, because of the job he did in Ukraine, he was rewarded with the post in Athens. And the embassy exerts a huge amount of influence, not only on politics, on society, on events, on tourism, on religion, on culture, everything.
Yeah, same here, and it's unbelievable too. No one else does this. It really is just the West that does this, and you would think like, well, China or Russia, wouldn't they be interested in doing this? But really, when you go to their embassy, it really is just like, do you want a visa or what? And that's it. That's all they're doing. If someone comes to ask for an interview, okay, but here, the U.S. embassy, I mean, if you see it, it's a complex. It's not an embassy. It is a whole complex. It takes up like almost the whole, there's a side road coming off the main road. And it's like almost the entire road is this complex. And they do it in all kinds of ways. They do it directly. And then, of course, there's the National Endowment for Democracy. And they project this idea that China is horrible. And I mean, they're telling this to Thai people who have had centuries of relationships with China through thick and thin, through some low points during the Cold War, all the way back up until now, where, you know, they're getting the rolling stock used to come from Germany, and now they're getting a lot of it from China, and that's the mass transit in the city, and now they're getting high-speed rail. They're getting all of their telecommunication infrastructure upgraded by Huawei. So, I mean, the U.S. embassy is trying to convince people here how horrible China is. Meanwhile, they're backing protests that are in the streets, hurting people, destroying property. This has been going on for years now. So I don't know. I don't know what their game plan is, but people are starting to get wise to it. It's interesting that they're also doing that there.
Was that your question, Gonzalo, that you were going to ask?
Answer your own question.
It doesn't matter. I mean, because we've gone in a different direction, in this direction, which is really fascinating. Because, like in Chile, for instance, in Santiago, the embassy is enormous. It is this complex, right? It is by the side of the river, in this piece of land that's easily 1 city square block. It was one of those pieces of land that, you know, was sort of like nobody knew what to do with it and was like abandoned for a number of years as the city grew around it, kind of. And it's an enormous plot of land. I mean, it looks like a like a castle keep of some sort, right? It's all like this red granite, kind of polished red granite all over the place. It's really quite spectacular. And the issue is why? Because it really does seem to be like the offices of some sort of occupation power. And what's bizarre is that, see, this embassy is relatively new. It was built in the early 2000s, Before that, the American embassy was downtown. It was in a converted townhouse, very discreet. I mean, it wasn't something that you'd even notice, to tell you the truth. And it of course it had security of various sorts, but it was not. It was very subtle, very low key. And all of a sudden, they decided that they were going to build this enormous embassy, and for what reason, never clear. The American embassy here in Kiev, another type like that. It's huge. It's big, muscular, brutalist kind of architecture, very much like the headquarters of some occupying force.
Like an evil villain.
Yeah, and in London, the same. They have the same kind of enormous embassy that a lot of people in London are upset about because this, that, the other reason. But it's this presence, this very arrogant presence, and it seems to have been a deliberate decision to sort of like in the early 2000s project enormous force by way of the embassy location. Because actually, now that I think about it, the current American embassy in London, I don't recall offhand. Somebody explained it to me when I was living in London, but they said it was something like from the 2000s. And now that I think about it, that I'm talking to you, I'm realizing that the American embassy in Chile was also from the 2000s. It's very much like a green zone, like in Iraq. You know, that zone, that, you know, a fortified, separate zone. It's deeply arrogant and creepy. And I'm wondering if it's sort of like compensation, like sort of like, you know, we're not actually that powerful. So maybe we'll just like project power by way of this brutalist building that we'll just plant in the middle of whatever capital city we happen to be in. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think you might be onto something. What was funny here, I thought it was funny that the British had a big old embassy too, right in the middle of Bangkok. And I don't know, there's some issue with the land. I think it was owned by one of the very wealthy families here who are involved in property development. I guess they wanted it back. And so they took it from the UK, and they were crying about it. They're like, look, there's all this history here. And they're like, nope, we're building a mall there. You can find an office like in a high rise and do your embassy stuff out of there. I hope it works out well for you. I thought that was hilarious. And, you know, Thai people don't want to pick a fight with the West. They want to work with them. They want to trade with them. They want tourists to come here. They want to send people to travel and study there. But they are doing it. They are doing it to themselves. They are making it an issue. They refuse to just treat other people like just other human beings. And I think everyone everywhere is getting fed up with it.
Yeah, and this is a recent thing. I'm sorry, Alex. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying, the bigger the embassy, going off of what you guys said, the bigger the embassy, the more it pushes the people of that community, like the American embassy, the more it pushes the Americans living in that country, whether they're working for the embassy or not, the more it pushes them to isolate themselves from integrating into the country. I mean, I remember in Mexico, this is before all the globalization and everything, and I remember the coolest kids in school were the kids whose parents worked at the American embassy because they had a supermarket at the American embassy in Mexico City. And in that supermarket, those kids were coming in and eating lunch at school, and they were cracking open Pringles and all of this American food that at the time, you know, Mexico, you would have the Mexican chips, but then you would see these kids who have Pringles, and you'd be like, oh man, where'd you get that? And they're like, you know, I get it at the supermarket of the embassy. And you could always feel that there was always a kind of bit of a separation. Well, when you have a smaller embassy, you know, the Cyprus embassy, you know, ours is a consulate where we issued visas, and that was pretty much it. One floor of a building, pretty much. So you didn't have really any other extra luxuries or services. You know, it was, you're in this country, you have to now integrate into this country. Okay, things have changed now, obviously. More globalization. Every country has their Starbucks and their McDonald's and all of these things, and the same food everywhere. But back then, I remember that the bigger the embassy, the more those people connected to that country of that embassy, the more they seemed to be separated from everybody else.
Yeah. I can see that.
It reminds me of that notion of that, the I'm sorry for being so vulgar, but you guys are the gentlemen here. I'm the vulgarian. The bigger the SUV, the bigger the Hummer, the smaller the appendage, if you will. It's sort of like overcompensating. I'm sorry, Brian, you were saying?
Well, think about it.
Yeah.
They had like several city blocks in Kabul in Afghanistan, and they had a
Oh
few
yeah.
there. So and in Iraq, I don't think their toehold there is any better. And again, you were talking about the green zone. So yeah, and the Romans, when they were building their empire, when they would start with a military camp, and then they would rebuild it off of a city plan based off of Rome, and they would have one of everything. And that's kind of what the U.S. Embassy does. Why do they need such huge embassies? What are they doing inside those embassies? We kind of know what they're doing. They're doing these influence operations. They're running media. They're doing all kinds of things that an embassy should not be doing at all, obviously, and that other embassies don't do. You look at any other embassy, no matter how big or small a country, they are very small, and they are just like you said. They're just for getting your visa, and maybe some other small things.
The fact that the Westerners are like this, that they go to some foreign country and they act like colonialists. I mean, and the Americans too, which do not have the kind of colonial DNA, if you will. But it's sort of like it's a continuation of that colonialism by way of economic means as opposed to military means. Although there is a military component to the neocolonialism that we're experiencing. But it's sort of like they never got over that colonialism of the past that was just really a historical accident because the West developed industrially first, but the rest of the world has caught up. I mean, I think that we can all agree that Thailand, China, the big countries of Asia, industrially, they are a match or superior to anything in the West. And one could argue, I mean, it's a known fact that Chinese industrial output is far and away greater than the Americans or anybody else's. And I don't know about Thailand itself, and so far as say comparison to Germany, but if you told me that they're sort of like neck and neck insofar as industrial output prior to the conflict, of course, I wouldn't be surprised. It's like the West doesn't seem to realize the changing reality, and they're like those tourists that you were mentioning. They want things to go back to the good old days where everything was shit in the poor country. And they
for everyone else except for them. Yeah. It's quite, and they're so shameless about it too. They don't even hear themselves when they talk. And I'm just lucky. I'm in a country where people, they're not going to look at me, and not yet. I mean, it hasn't gotten so bad where they're like, if they see any Westerner, they want to tar and feather them. And I don't think that they will. They're very reasonable. So I'm very lucky about that, because there are so many such obnoxious people here that really do make these countries in the West look horrible. I mean, especially the US and the UK, and also it's very hard to meet French people here also. So France, the UK, the US, these are the countries where I see the most obnoxious. And I'm not saying that everyone from those countries are like that, but the ones coming here seem to mostly be like that.
Yeah. An angel got his wings. We say that in Spanish when there's like a pause in the conversation. Yeah, because thinking of all this, of how quickly the West is falling apart. Not just in this particular period of the last couple of years, but we were talking about how the infrastructure in America has been decaying over the last 20 odd years, at least. It's something startling, because I remember thinking in the 90s, that these good times weren't going to last. But I thought to myself that it would be like another century, certainly not in my lifetime. And here we are. And that's the thing that I find deeply shocking. And I wonder if the Romans back in the day thought the same thing, that, the empire will last forever, and then all of a sudden started collapsing in the 5th century or something.
The U.S. has all the capabilities to build the most fantastic public transport for their cities. I mean, beautiful cities, New York, Chicago, Miami. But when you're sending 105 billion, I don't want to get on geopolitics.
No,
but
let's
go.
go
sending
wherever we want to go. It's fine.
But when you're sending 105 billion in 10 months to Ukraine, I mean, there it is. There it is. Right there.
Or 1 trillion on the F-35 program. 1 trillion is enough to give universal health care to every American and then have enough left over to build a city on Mars. That's just for some fighter jet that they're never going to send it into, Russian or Chinese airspace because it'll be shot down. It's to bomb people in developing countries. And there's fewer and fewer of those countries that are being left vulnerable because either the U.S. has already bombed them or because they're buying air defense systems from Russia or China. So think about that, $1 trillion. I don't think people understand how much money that is.
$1 million. That's what it is. Million.
Yeah, million. And that's the thing, I was just thinking right now as Brian was mentioning it, and I was thinking, I lived in D.C. I went to university in Virginia in the South. I mean, beautiful, beautiful areas. History, really interesting history, amazing schools, and even the architecture. You have that nice architecture. It's all there. It's all there. But the U.S. has to pull back from these international adventures and stop throwing their money at these things, at losing ventures. I mean, this is a losing venture in Ukraine, but they're just not doing it. But there it is. They have the money. They have the ability to make these cities and these areas, exactly what you were describing, Gonzalo and Brian. I mean, they can make the infrastructure. They can build the roads and the trains and clean up the cities and whatever they want to do. It's all there. But you can't have both. You can't be involved in one place and take care of your home as well.
Yeah, and the thing is, they have all of the resources to do it, including the human resources. Yeah. Think about China. China doesn't have a national endowment for democracy. They're influencing other countries because people see what they have and they want it also. People see Hollywood and they think that's what the US has, but that's not what the US really has. And even in that case, it's I think that is a little bit, the image is a bit on the decline. It's been running off a momentum. But if the United States wanted to, they could turn inward. They could invest in themselves, and they could create a society that other people would want to emulate. And they could influence people that way rather than forcing themselves onto everyone else, which is as we're talking about how it is a losing proposition everywhere where they're doing this. That the playing field is leveling out. The only thing that's going to matter in the future is going to be human resources, how much you invest in your people. But even that, the US is going to start losing their advantage there as well, because everything is rotting now. I mean, society, the way people think, the way they interact with one another, the people being divided. I mean, that's the other thing here. If you see a group of expats, you could almost guarantee what side they're going to be on any given issue. They're consuming that Western media, and so it's very sad. It's very sad. It's like a whole civilization. I think they're like victims of this small, tiny handful that are running everyone off the cliff.
Yeah. I'm thinking about the F-35 that you were mentioning, that it's going to cost altogether $1 trillion, right? And the thing is, that the people in the Pentagon have realized, hey, if we send these planes to Ukraine, they're going to get shot down. And you realize too that the weapons manufacturers, the ones who built these stupid planes, they're the ones screaming the most to not go because they're going to be found out. I mean, it's just like. And by the way, I know I said that we weren't going to do like geopolitics and the war and all that, but just as an aside, this war has really changed the whole issue of the aircraft, the manned aircraft. I mean, this is kind of like World War II, that sort of like was the breaking point between the battleship and the aircraft carrier. The manned aircraft is useless, it seems to me. Would that be an accurate assessment? I mean, Brian, you're on top of this shit a lot more than I am. Has manned air power been important in this conflict, or can the drones and the precision guided weapons sort of like do the same thing?
I think manned aviation is still extremely important. It has a very unglamorous kind of secondary role in what's going on. I mean, Russia is still flying. I think it was like between 200 or 300 sorties a day, whatever the Pentagon was. That was the number the Pentagon themselves were citing. Drones are obviously extremely important. Precision weapons, obviously extremely important. It is kind of changing the dynamics of how you fight. If you have air defense, if both sides have sophisticated integrated air defense systems, you're not able to employ your manned aviation the same way you would have been able to, like, say, the US was over Iraq. But you still need it. You still need it. It's just going to play a different role, and it's not going to be central.
I mean,
I don't know what the future holds for.
Apart from logistics, obviously, but what does manned aircraft bring to the table that would be, important?
I mean, right now they are the aircraft firing the cruise missiles at doing standoff attacks, and actually Russian military aviation is doing mostly standoff attacks. So you will see them come up to the edge of where they think Ukrainian air defense can reach. They will fire their weapons and then they will turn back. They will not operate in an area where they think there is air defenses that might take them out. And that's actually what the U.S. and Israel are doing in Syria also, which is funny because they have the F-35, which is supposedly stealth, and the U.S. also has the F-22, and yet they have still decided that they're going to carry out standoff strikes, which means firing from a distance outside of an adversary's air defense system. So yeah, it's changing everything. Someday, yeah, you just have a drone carry out the standoff attack, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean,
but it's changing.
The obvious question is that why put the standoff missile on an aircraft? Why not just have a ground launcher?
Well, it has to get close. Has to get close, and like, say for Russia, it's just easier for them to put them on the planes at the airport and then send them off instead of moving all of those weapons closer and closer to the theater. They got, these aircraft have very long ranges, and they could take off from deep inside Russian territory.
So the missile would have to have a greater fuel capacity or what have you, to the detriment of its payload. Is that basically the reason?
Yeah, I mean, you couldn't fire it from inside Russia. It would have to be a very large, so like a rocket.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, no, because it seems that the West has. I remember at the beginning of this conflict, they were talking about declaring a no-fly zone over Ukraine, and I thought that was laughable. But a lot of people were very, very serious about it. Although that talk has completely died out. I haven't heard anybody say that realistically. But again, it's kind of like that Western arrogance. Oh yeah, we can declare a no-fly zone and nobody will mess with us because we're the most powerful military in the world. And I think bizarrely, even though NATO has not officially, at least, have boots on the ground, everybody's realizing that Western power is so fragile, and it's just not up to the job. And it's sort of like, I still hold my head and don't quite understand how everything went tits up that fast.
I don't. In terms of what?
Oh, go ahead,
Gonzalo. No, just in terms of what do you mean?
In terms of everything, because if you were to say just 5 years ago, in 2017, that some conflict like this would emerge, everybody would be like, oh, the NATO would be able to intervene and roll over the Russians, and it would be no big deal. But now it's sort of like, no, and everybody, without articulating it, has a sense that NATO has not gone in boots on the ground, officially NATO, because they're scared, because they're just not up to the task. They don't have the equipment, they don't have the men, they don't have anything necessary to really go toe-to-toe, which was with what was supposed to be a very second-tier power. I mean, that was the prevailing idea insofar as Russia is concerned. But NATO just is not up to the task. I mean, is it? I don't think so. And correct me if I'm wrong.
No, I don't think that it is. But since we're talking about being expats and traveling around, when you are traveling around outside of the West, you can see how quickly everyone else is catching up technologically, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of manufacturing, also military technology. And it's not that they're just catching up like in a linear way. It's exponential. Every year it's happening faster and faster. And so this isn't really, I mean, I think there is a certain amount of decay within Western systems, but I really think it is just everybody else catching up as well. And this is something that, I mean, how do you reverse that? How do you stop that? How do you stay ahead of that when the thing that really counts now is, you know, how many engineers are you churning out of in a university? How, you know, the quality of your human resources. And if you just have plain outright, just many more people, how does the West compete with? I mean, China has a larger population than the G7 combined. How do you compete with that when technology starts leveling the playing field in all other ways?
Yeah, I mean, I think we understand that, but you know, there is still a large portion of the population in most countries in the collective West that do believe that NATO, if they were to get involved, would kick ass. And they do believe that Russia is losing very, very bad. I mean,
Yeah.
I came across a couple of videos that were put on our locals board, and it was these geopolitical analysts with high subscriber numbers, and they were talking about how this conflict is going to play out over the next 6 months. And I mean, these analysts were saying that Ukraine has now they have seized more weapons and more tanks than what they had when the war began. And they're going to mount this massive offensive. They're going to roll over the Russians. The Russian economy is tanking. The Chinese economy is on its last legs. And I mean, you know, these weren't like crazy guys. I mean, they seemed like they were serious guys, you know, reporting on how they see things. So, I mean, it's, you know, I think all of us in this conversation, the chat and all of us in this conversation, we have a pretty good idea of what's going on. But, you know, and I see it in Greece as well. And Greece is very Russian friendly. I mean, we have a lot of, you know, connections to Russia culturally, religiously, especially religiously. And even, you know, when you talk to Greeks who aren't like following the news every day, they're like, you know, God, why is Russia losing? You know, why is it taking so long? Ukraine's really, really rolling over them. They took over Kharkiv and then they took over Kherson. And, you know, my point is that the media, this is the real power. It goes back to what we were talking about, Thailand and Hollywood. The real power is the soft power. I mean, that is the real power. That
I see your point, but I would disagree because the soft power is real power until the bullets start flying, and once that happens, then all bets are off. Because before the actual breakout of conflict, you could bullshit everybody. Bullshit people into thinking that you were much more powerful than you actually were. Bullshit about the weakness of your opponent. But when the bullets start flying and the bodies start piling up, that's when you realize, hey, no, these are lies, and we have been led down a garden path. I mean, wouldn't you agree?
I would say that the soft power is so powerful and compelling that despite all of that, because I was just going to say, why don't we just start talking about realistic casualty numbers on both sides and let's see who's winning that. Russia said it was a war of attrition from the very beginning. They're going to demilitarize Ukraine. So we're talking about things disappearing off the battlefield, including people.
Especially
we
people.
We just heard van der Leyen talk about 100,000 dead Ukrainian officers, which, you know, she doesn't know what she's talking about. But that number came from somewhere.
Yeah, and she was a former minister of defense. I will let you know.
Well, I'm starting to think that she didn't get that job because she was qualified. I don't know why. I don't know why she got it. I think there's a lot of politicians in positions of you know, these are very important positions that you need to be qualified to be in, and they're just putting people in there because of their last name or their connections. And I think she's one of them.
Oh yeah, absolutely, no question.
But we're talking about 100,000. I think after that, I forget who, maybe it was the foreign minister of Ukraine, said that there's like 10,000. No, we only lost 10,000, something like that. And it's like but you have also said that you're losing 200 or 300 a day. So if we add that up over the last like 9 or 10 months, that's way more than 10,000. So I mean, nothing you're saying is adding up. And if you're one of these people saying Russia is losing, but that's how compelling the soft power is, because the Western media papers over all of these facts, and they still sell you this narrative that somehow Ukraine is winning, Russia is losing, and everything is going to crumble. People have been saying China, its economy is going to collapse in 1 month. They've been saying this for like half a year now, or longer.
But think about Afghanistan. What happened in Afghanistan? The day before, Biden was talking about how everything is okay. There are no problems in Afghanistan. It's all going good. And the next day, it collapsed. Yeah. But has anyone been questioned about it? Have we seen any type of investigation into it? Senate hearings? I don't know. No one talks about it. 80 billion lost in weapons. No one says anything. As a matter of fact, the Democrat Party did really well. If you look at their position, they did really well in the elections, in the midterms, despite Afghanistan. No one talks about it. That's the power. That's the soft media power. And going off of your point, Brian, I completely agree. And I remember I did a video about this like 3 months ago when people were talking about the casualties and everything like that. And I was just kind of thinking to myself, the proxy war is the perfect model for NATO, because they can hide casualties. People can't visualize casualties. You can't get a map, like you have all the mapping channels, and someone to say, well, look at all the people here, all the casualties here, and look at the casualties there. So this side is doing better. But territory and showing the map that it's blue or red, and look at the territory one here. People can visualize that, and myself included, and I could see that, and I could say, okay, well, they're taking back this territory, or this is flipped from red to blue. So that means that they're winning. The proxy war is almost a perfect model for NATO. And if things go badly, walk away. I honestly believe that they believe, and they may be right. They believe they can memory hold it, and they may be right. Actually, I think they are right.
I think they are right.
Say, well, Ukraine, oh yeah, everything's fine over there. Don't worry about it. Next conflict, next crisis.
And I think people who have fully invested themselves into it, because I think there really is Ukraine fatigue, they'll be like, oh, thank God, I don't have to, I can get that flag off my profile.
I'm living here and I'm fatigued by it. So yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a really good point. I never even thought about that. And if anyone's watching this that has one of those mapping websites, I mean, maybe you should put like losses, like a metric. Like on a bar graph.
Yeah, how do you visualize that? How do you represent that and show it to the people that, look, this is another component. It's a terrible component. It's a horrible component to the war. But I mean, better than I do. It is part of war.
Well, actually, it's the determining factor in war, because ultimately you don't fight against the land. You fight against an opposing army. And the land, if there's no opposing army, then you'll take over all the land. So there's that. And when was it the BBC that was doing these estimates of Russian losses? They seem to have stopped doing that. But the losses that they had estimated from social media and everything was like 5,000-6,000. This was a couple of months ago, but the figures have probably not increased significantly, considering how the Russians are carrying out the war at this time. They were saying like 5,000-6,000, but they weren't counting the militia, and they weren't counting Wagner or the Chechens. Say it was like 10,000, against at least 100,000 Zelensky regime forces. I mean, it's so lopsided that it's absurd, and that really tells you how the war is going. But yeah, they're just bullshitting their way with the maps. Oh, look, it's blue now, so they're winning.
And that's how they're doing it.
Yeah, and I just, another point is that's why they're very careful about sending troops in, or sending a large number of troops in. They'll send mercenaries, and they'll send NATO commanders, but the collective West, at least my feeling, is that they understand that if a certain country gets too involved in Ukraine and they start to suffer too many casualties, that's going to be hard to hide after a while, because even in Europe, you have a lot of small countries, and someone's going to know someone who died in the war, or something happened to them, and they're going to say, well, what was he doing in Ukraine? And oh, I also know a guy. Oh, I also know someone. And that's when problems start to arise with the narrative.
Yeah, well,
in that country.
Yeah, exactly right. Because what's happening now in Poland, they have this new dedicated cemetery to Poles who have died in Ukraine. And forgive me, I seem to recall the number was 1,600 Poles have already been killed in it. And that's not a negligible number. 1,600 Polish troops have been killed in Ukraine. I do recall it was that number. I know that they built a cemetery. And so anyway, the point is that, yeah, you start being unable to hide the casualties. It's just... But I still disagree that soft power is the ultimate power. I mean, I have to hold on to that.
I don't say it's the ultimate power. I agree with you. I don't think it's the ultimate power, but I think in this case, or the way we're seeing so many wars unfold with the proxies, you get the proxy and they fight. I think if you had to say this was a business model, I think the business model is get the proxy. We can gloss over casualties because it's a proxy that's far away from us and it's not our guys. We can focus on the visuals of it all, the territories and stuff like that. And underpinning all of it is this massive soft power that they control, whether it's mainstream media or big tech. I mean, they control it all, full spectrum dominance of this area. And that underpins everything. And I think that's one of the reasons why Ukraine is such a confusing war for a lot of people to understand, because, Russia is definitely fighting a very different war than Iraq or something like that we saw in the early 2000s.
I'm even surprised that a lot of people whom I consider sophisticated about the situation are so incredibly misinformed about the actual prosecution of the war. I was watching John Mearsheimer on some conversational show. I was going to do a video about it, but things piled up. And Mearsheimer, who is a very sophisticated geopolitical thinker, he insisted that the Russians had waged a terrible war in the first few months of the conflict without recognizing what the priorities of the Russians were. I mean, he had bought into the narrative. And it's so dispiriting that so many people, like you said before, Alex, sophisticated people who ought to know better, have such a terrible and completely erroneous view of the conflict. I don't know what will dissuade them. I don't know what will be the moment when they realize, this is what's really going on. And I've been, eating on a diet of bullshit for the last 10 months, So
what happened to all of the people cheerleading for, well, I guess there really weren't that many people cheerleading for the conflict in Afghanistan, but I mean, a lot of the people, I mean, they just go on to the next thing and no one even thinks about it because they're consumed with the next thing. That's the unfortunate part. And you see these people, when you see a Ukraine flag in their profile, I mean, you know what type of person you're dealing with. You're not going to have a very in-depth conversation with them. And they're just going to go to the next thing. Once this is over, it'll be the next thing. They will never, it's just like pop bands. It was, I don't know the name of any pop bands. I'm a very... boring person, but they just go to the next one, and then it's like New Kids on the Block. What was that? That was one from way back in the 90s, I think.
They completely forget. It's they consume wars for their media cycle. It's bizarre. Yeah. Let me bring on Yannick. Yannick, my friend, how's it going?
Hello.
Yannick is one of my supporters on Patreon. Thanks very much, Yannick, for coming on. What's your question for Brian and Alex?
Well, to be honest, guys, I am absolutely blown away by this whole conversation that you guys have been having, especially given that I'm an 11-hour drive south of Brian. I'm actually in Phuket, and I can actually confirm, like, I tend to want to stay away from any kind, we call them farang here.
Yeah.
We call them farang here, the expats, the tourists, and everything. And I mean, once you go to those go girly bars, we have a street, like a walking street here as well. And I don't know about you, Brian, but I avoid this stuff like the plague. It's absolutely
Yeah.
horrible.
It's not hard to do either because they're not everywhere.
Oh
So
my God.
where I am, there's none of these places anywhere around here. I mean, I'd have to travel because of the traffic. It would probably be like an hour or two of it being in the traffic to get to one of these places. So yeah, but sometimes I'm talking with my wife and I'm talking about falang, and she's like, "You're a Westerner." Did you forget?
No, it's true. It's absolutely true. In Hong Kong, they call them guailos, which means like white ghost. But basically, I love this conversation. I don't really have any kind of question. I'm just shooting the shit with you guys. I've been an expat pretty much all my life. From age 4, going to live in Haiti for 5 years because my dad decided to move there because he got a work contract. Age 10 to maybe 16 in Algiers, again, same kind of thing. And if there's one thing, and I'm going to drag you guys away from geopolitics for a second, back into the expat thing. In a way, it takes you out of the matrix. It takes you out of the plantation. I could not ever go back to living in either Ontario or Quebec and see reality the same way that I see it now. Like, and I don't know if it's happened to you guys, but if I go back, let's say to the South Shore of Montreal, where I'm originally from, and I see people that I've been to high school with and everything, and they're, the house, the 2 cars, dog, cat, 2.5 kids. And it's just like, you're chained there. You're going to be a tax-paying slave all your life. It's just like, no. I mean, in this part where I'm living, nice little Muslim neighborhood, everybody's quiet. You just be a good neighbor. Nobody bothers you. The mom and pop shop is right next door compared to 7-Eleven. The prices are also better. You still got to go to 7-Eleven because it's a Muslim neighborhood. You can't buy beer and so on. But besides that, I could never, ever, ever, ever go back to the previous life. And I remember what Alex was saying earlier with regards to kids eating Pringles. Excuse me, but why the fuck would you want to eat American food in Mexico? For Christ's sake, I was stranded there for 3 weeks. I was going to the taqueria, the parrilla, and just picking something different on the menu every day and trying it. Anyway, sorry guys, I'm ranting. If somebody else wants to jump in, feel free.
That's quite all right. I just want to ask Yannick and Brian something. See, when you guys arrive in Thailand, do they have like a regulation that you have to get buzz cut?
No, I think it's just a coincidence.
I'm sorry. I'm just being incredibly mean, but it was just the first thing that struck my mind. Yannick,
it's like 30 degrees here now.
Well, yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
It's definitely helps. But I was doing this before I got to Thailand, but it definitely helps a lot. Yeah, I couldn't imagine having.
I'm sorry for teasing
if I
you
could
both.
grow a full head of hair. I don't think I could imagine.
I'm getting there. I'm compensating. That's why I'm letting the back of my hair grow long. Because I'm going bald.
It's okay. I got a clipper. Whenever you get over here, we can fix you up real nice.
Yannick, it's a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining. Take care.
Bye, guys.
Thank you, Yannick.
Bye.
Take care.
Thanks. Yeah. Well, let me bring in another caller. Small Town Voice. Small Town Voice, how's it going? Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. You can hear me well?
Yes, we hear you
Okay.
fine. How's it going? And thank you very much for your support. It's very much appreciated.
I just want to tell you, I'm a fan of all 3 of your program. I watch all your programs on a regular basis, and I have my own small channel targeting for Chinese audience, and I use some of your information. Sometimes I'll just tell them, I learned this from Alex's channel, from Brian's channel, etc. Sometimes I'll just summarize whatever I got and then tell my audience. So thank you for all of you. And I, big fan of you. And when you guys talking about the media controlled by the mainstream media, I just want to agree with you that I think that the media is still very powerful. I just recently had a conversation with a friend of mine who's very well educated, well traveled, that kind of person. but she firmly believed that, Ukraine is a democracy, is a vibrant democracy, and the Russian is, invasion for Ukraine is wrong for that reason. I mean, like I said, this is a friend of mine that I have a lot of respect for. I don't even know how to convince her. I mean, I just didn't say much, but it just reflects it that the media is still very strong, very powerful, very, and that will lead me to another thing I want you all to know the reason why China has this censorship. As you can see, I'm Chinese, lived many years in the United States. I think, if you see the mainstream media in the US is this much controlled, they are a propaganda machine, the mouthpiece of the government, more or less. Well, I mean, the Chinese government doesn't want that, honestly. The reason it is controlled like this is because there are capital behind it. The mainstream media pretty much is controlled by, a few big corporations. Now, in China, the problem is, of course, China also have big corporations. Once you let it free, you have a free, so-called in the Western standard, the free, press, it will be automatically controlled by the private corporations. And they would do exactly the same thing as the US will, corporation would do. And they would have their own agenda, and they will use their platforms for their own agenda narratives. Not only that, the United States, the NED, the CIA, the State Department, they are going to jump onto this. They are going to jump into China to control the narratives there. So if you were the Chinese government, what would you do? If you want to protect your own media, protect the narratives, right? There's no other way to have a really hard control of your media. That's the reason China has its system it has. That's why I support it, even though I think freedom of speech is totally important. I hate to see what happened with Julian Assange. But what China is doing, I can have deep understanding. I mean, I have partners in China, business partners, they put my videos in the Chinese social media. It's quite popular. But many of my channels, programs, they cannot easily put it up there for sensitivity, because it's a little bit political. But I have deep understanding for that.
Yeah, that's an incredibly good point, Small Town. They don't want to be flooded with Western propaganda. It's basically would be opening the back door to Western intelligence services and diplomatic services to start essentially brainwashing their own population.
Yeah.
So basically, they're like saying, better us brainwash our people than the foreigners.
Yeah. And to be honest, I watch the Chinese, central control, the newspaper and the TV. Honestly, they don't lie much. Seriously, they don't. It's boring. Some of their programs are pretty boring, but I don't see they flatly lying about things the way that the Western media, are doing. I mean, maybe some news they don't tell people. But it's still very rare to see official Chinese channel, from the government flatly lying. I mean, I have yet to see that.
It's like the Russian Ministry of Defense. If there's bad news, they just won't talk about it. But they really don't sit there fabricating things like the West does.
That's the thing. I mean, the U.S. government just lying left and right, all the time.
Yeah.
Right.
So you're absolutely right, Small Town. Thank you so much for joining. I'm sorry, Alex.
No, where all of this came up, this big problem came up with the media control, in my opinion, with social media. That's when this got exponentially worse, because social media has turned into a winner-take-all business model. 15 years ago, the days of, say, MySpace. In those days, MySpace was a big player, but you had like MySpace and High Five and Friendster and Tagged. I remember all kinds of social networks were around, and each social network, maybe it had its certain geography, its certain niche, and there was not one social network that dominated all. It didn't dominate everything. Then the iPhone came out, and cloud computing came out. It all kind of came at the same time. And it turned to this winner-take-all business model. And you're going to have one social network for your friends or your family, and that's going to be Facebook. And then you're going to have Twitter, which is going to be the broadcasting of news, and then YouTube's your video, and that's it. And the US, the VCs were able to pump so much money into these social networks, and they were able to scale them up to levels that other social networks, whether they were US based or a lot of them were outside of the US, that you can't keep up. you couldn't keep up, and that was it. They swallowed everybody, and that's now that's why it's so dangerous now, because you have these winner take all networks in the media, and they're also colluding with the mainstream media channels like CNN and BBC and Fox News.
And the
if you're
government.
Yeah, and the government.
and the
we're
government.
seeing that now. I mean, we all knew it, and we all knew it. But now we're seeing it.
Yeah. What's going on
How do
now
you get out of it if you're China or Russia or any of these countries? What do you do? How do you fight that?
Well, I like to compare information space to a nation's airspace, their shores, and their land borders. You have to protect those physical realms. Information in the 21st century is also a realm. It's not physical, but you still need to protect it. You cannot let another nation, another set of interests outside come in and dominate it, because they can actually use that to destroy your country, just like if they took over your airspace or they had gunships off your coast. This is a real problem. And countries like China or Russia, they have this approach where they are protecting their information space, and the West spins it as if, oh, they're just against free speech. When in the West, if you say something that actually has a chance of changing something, you're gone too. Look, Julian Assange, for example.
Yeah. Small Town Voice, thanks very much for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Take care.
Yes, and thanks for sharing our work also. I really appreciate that.
Check out Small Town Voice. Is that the name of your YouTube channel?
Yeah, 小镇小民 in Chinese. So yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Take care.
Thank you.
Yeah. A quick somebody who's been waiting patiently here for a bit. Let's just bring him on. Chris is not here. Chris, how's it going?
Hey guys, what's going on?
How's it going? Good to see you again.
Good to see you too. I'm definitely not getting a buzz cut, man. That's just too much.
Enjoy it while you have it.
Yes, fully agree. What's on your mind, man?
Well, I don't really have a question for you guys. I have a more or less a statement for the people in the chat, aka the playground. So, all right, here we go. Anybody who took the vaccine or went along with the mandates, anyone who supported that, go to hell. Straight up.
Okay, fair enough. Anything else on your mind?
No, that's it.
Okay, thanks a lot, Chris. You take care. I'll see you on Sunday. Okay, no, because we were the issue of the information space. I mean, I hadn't thought of it in those terms that Small Town Voice put it, of protecting your own information space. But absolutely right. I mean, how can I put it? The information I'm seeing coming out of Russia, the RT, Sputnik, the Ministry of Defense, they don't mention when things go south for them. And sometimes when they talk about numbers of troops specifically, I suspect that they're lying, that actually the number might be a lot greater. But I have never seen them say something that was untrue. I mean, have you guys?
I can't really think of anything. I mean, you have to be very careful whenever they say something. When I source something, I usually source from the Western media, because you cannot convince people who don't agree with you that the Russian media or the Russian government is telling the truth. But I don't trust that they are anyway. You have to verify all of this stuff on your own the best that you can. So, but I haven't really seen them straight up fabricating something. I have not seen them do that.
No ghost of Moscow?
No
Goat of Moscow.
No
Moscow adventure.
Moscow either.
I think for the most part, to be fair to RT or Sputnik, for the most part, I think they're pretty measured. I don't think they're too sensational on things. I'm not saying they don't get it wrong at times, but for the most part, they're not. They're pretty straightforward in their reporting, it seems.
Yeah, they remind me of broadcasts of the 90s that would go across all the information that's going on in the world, and they would not sensationalize any one particular story. And you look at the American mainstream media, and they will latch onto one particular story and drive it into the ground. Everything is about that particular story. And then they'll ignore everything else. There isn't a sense that you're getting a well-rounded, well-grounded and broad spectrum reportage of what's going on in the world. It's just the one thing, and they bang that drum like there's no tomorrow, and then they flip it to something else. I mean, remember the plane that went down, the Malaysia flight that went down in the Indian Ocean or wherever it was? They were hitting that one like there was no tomorrow. At one point, they had some commentators saying on CNN saying that maybe the aliens took them. I mean, like, dude, you know?
Yeah, Don Lemon was talking about a black hole incident with that plane for a week. It wasn't like one show; it was like a week.
Yeah. I think when, say, RT gets something wrong, usually it's because whoever was on that story, because they cover everything. So they cover things that that's not really tied into anything that the Russian government is interested in. I've seen them get some things here in Southeast Asia way off. But that's because they're just looking at whatever the Western media is saying. And which when you think about it is insane, because the only reason they exist is to counter the Western media, not buttress, because everything the Western media covers, there is a purpose to it. They're manipulating or just outright lying about almost everything, because the U.S. is involved everywhere. People are like, Brian, it's not like you say the U.S. is behind everything. I mean, go to the NED website and they've got a map, and they're literally everywhere except Antarctica. And it's only because there's no people there.
And what's interesting is that, the mainstream media in the States right now, they are just not even touching the fact that Twitter is coming out. Elon Musk has been coming out with all this information of election engineering, basically, of manipulation of the 2016, the 2020 election, insofar as the Hunter Biden story and all that stuff. They're not touching that at all. And so if you're just a regular citizen in the United States, you have no idea that your democracy was manipulated by outside forces. You think that the election was on the up and up. And it's like you are accusing your opponents or wished for opponents of exactly what you yourself are doing. It seems that everything that's going on in the American leadership class is projection. Whatever they're doing, they say the other guy did it.
Yeah, this is the biggest story for the U.S., but it has international implications as well. I mean, Musk is starting to release stuff about
Brazil.
Brazil, and he says he's going to release other countries. But I mean, they went off the rails when they censored a U.S. president. To me, I remember when that happened, and I said, "This is it." And people have forgotten about that. A lot of people they just don't talk about that anymore. But I mean, who are you to lecture about free speech or anything like that when you've censored your own your own president? You censored the guy. Whatever your beliefs are about Trump, doesn't matter. You just can't remove a U.S. president. And that's why, it goes back to what we were talking about. The media, they could amplify a story or they can memory hold a story. And that's what they're doing with Twitter right now. And what are they doing? They're attacking Matt Taibbi. They're saying that this story about the laptop is just about Hunter Biden and his extracurricular activities, and it has no bearing on Joe Biden at all. Everyone forgets about 2014. Everyone forgets about the coup. Everyone forgets about Burisma. No one talks about the video where Biden is sitting there on video talking about his quid pro quo to fire the process. It's right there. It's right there. There it is. But no, Trump was engaging in a quid pro quo with Zelensky when he said one sentence in some transcript relayed by Vindman that he's going to withhold something from, I don't even remember it anymore. It was so insignificant, and they had a whole impeachment over that. This is all media fabricated stuff, but the real stories, they just don't talk about it, or they twist it and they turn the enemy into something else, and they're very good at that.
Yeah, or right now, maybe people who supported Trump or are sympathetic to him, they're going to follow this. And then because I've watched this go back and forth from left to right in U.S. politics over the years since Bush, because I mean, a lot of people are saying these Democrat wars of intervention. I mean, that was under Bush, and Bush got in because Clinton was the one doing all of these intervention. So they also do that. They play the left and the right against each other. And if they could just get half, it's like crawling forward, and you just put your left hand forward and pull yourself forward, and then your right hand. And they're kind of doing this. They're kind of doing this with this whole Twitter thing. Or once they get past this, because they're making it all about Trump, when in reality, everyone on both sides should be upset about this.
Yes.
Because it's beyond U.S. politics. They have been using Twitter and Facebook and Google to meddle in countries all around the world. They have destroyed entire countries. Libya, that is an example. Syria, they were involved in that as well. So, I mean, that's what people should be upset about. But they use the left and the right to, at least get some people on their side and keep pushing the agenda forward just a little bit more.
It's the textbook definition, Brian, of fascism. The textbook, the simple definition of forget about all the other stuff that people scream about. Oh, you're a fascist. Forget about that. This is the textbook definition of fascism, the government working in cahoots with these large corporations, with these large industries. That's it.
Yeah. And I think it should be pointed out that we think that it's social media, but when you look at what they have been doing with Facebook and Twitter, the way they tweak the algorithm, and how when you look at your timeline, you're looking at half of the stuff on your timeline is stuff you're not following, you're not interested in. They're just shoving it into your face. So social media was very appealing, and people really enjoyed it. And they were, I think initially they were getting a lot out of it, and people were getting genuine followings and connecting with people they wanted to. But because they were messing with the algorithm, they have been slowly changing it back to programmed media.
Yeah.
So it looks like social media, but a lot of the stuff that you're seeing is actually programmed. They're shoving it down your throat.
The problem is the algorithm.
Yeah.
Because in the past, the way Twitter used to work was you were just getting the information in a timeline order of the people that you're following.
Yeah.
There was no algorithm, really.
Exactly.
There was none. And if you didn't like something, you would erase it, delete it, block it, whatever. That was it. But then the algorithms, because you got to get the advertising, and then the government steps in, and here we are today. But it's the algorithm that is the problem.
Yeah, I agree.
Get rid of the algorithm.
But one of the things that I find shocking was in 2017, I think it was, they banned the Daily Stormer, which is a neo-Nazi site, avowedly neo-Nazi site. And they deleted the website or one of the IP providers. I mean, they did something to basically shut it down. And everybody was on board with it. And I remember thinking at the time, from the Daily Stormer to anybody else, it's just going to be just a matter of time. And it went really from 2017 that they banned the Daily Stormer to 2020 when they banned Donald Trump. I mean, the sky is the limit insofar as whom they can repress. And so, I watch you guys on the Duran, for instance, and you guys are always very careful, necessarily careful, to not even mention certain words that, anybody who watches the Duran knows that you guys are the most judicious commentators on YouTube, right? But the notion that you guys have to tiptoe around certain words for fear of getting banned, that's the kind of society we're living in, which is basically late stage Soviet era. I mean, this is what we're talking about. I mean, back then, of course, there was no social media, and it was the writers and artists who had to be incredibly careful as to what they were really talking about, and everybody had to sort of like read between the lines. The same thing is happening now, and it hurts the society if you're not able to speak your mind, if you're not able to say things that are objectively true. Then you're not going to be able to improve your own society. You're destined to go down the tubes. And so my thinking has been, when they banned the Daily Stormer, dislikable though they may be, it just led inevitably to this situation of late stage Brezhnev era insofar as communications and information is concerned.
Well, look, you should be doing this based on laws. Like if you feel like your society has a huge racism problem, like say in Singapore, they made very specific laws to cover that. And so that's already taken care of. Then you don't need a social media company come and police what everybody is saying if you've already set up laws, if you feel like that is a problem in your society. The other thing that I just find amazing is that people are being thrown off of Twitter for apparently being sympathetic to Nazis, but you're also being thrown off of Twitter if you point out that the U.S. is actually arming and funding and backing and inviting not like actual Nazis to Congress, and they're fighting their proxy war for them in Ukraine. If you point that out, you're also thrown out. It's very confusing. You're against Nazism and trying to expose it, you're gone. If you're sympathetic toward Nazis, but not the right Nazis, not the actual Nazis, you're also gone. It's crazy. They're losing their mind, I think.
I was banned from Twitter because I said that I commented on some video that showed crime in Europe. And I said something along the lines of, Europe is being raped. I didn't threaten anybody with rape. I just said that the continent is being raped. And of course, it was figurative, obviously. But just using the word apparently was enough to get me banned, which is just absurd. Or perhaps I was on some naughty list, and that's why they banned me and they used it as an excuse. I don't know.
That's why.
Yeah.
Do you guys think that there's going to be any kind of serious sea change insofar as the information space is concerned, or is it just going to continue to decay?
Eventually.
Eventually,
but it's going to take time. Eventually, it's going to take time. I mean, to be honest, Trump had the opportunity to take care of this.
Yeah.
He had control of Congress. He was the president. Everyone was telling him, you need to get a grip on social media. It's going to come back and it's going to hurt you. He didn't do it.
He didn't do a lot of things.
Yeah, he didn't do a lot of things. I sympathize with people who voted for him or placed their hope with him. He said a lot of things that you wanted to believe were going to happen, but that's the exact same thing when Obama first came around. He was going to end all of the wars. Instead, he created many more wars. And it's the same thing with Trump. When he was actually in office, he gathered together the absolute worst people.
Yes,
the worst, not like just he's a neocon, like the worst neocons were all there. And I mean, it was like you said you were going to drain the swamp, but now you're like restocking the swamp with even scarier monsters. And but this is something that in American politics happens over and over and over again. They tell you what you want to hear during campaign season, and then once they get into office, they do the exact opposite. It has happened over and over again. You can agree with the things that they say that they're going to do, but then you want to see them actually do it. If he actually did do these things, I think it would have made a big difference. And anyone who comes along and stops these wars.
Yeah. Here's Reckless Abandon, Brett Harris. Alex, Brett. He's Reckless Abandon.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Just like Alex, the other Alex.
Brett.
Hi,
How you
Alex.
doing?
Not bad at all. I liked your video this morning. Just the
thanks.
one, with the big long clown world. I mean,
yeah. Germany going to Germany and Norway asking NATO to help protect their pipelines.
What's on your mind, Brett?
I was just going to talk about Twitter as well. I could talk to Alex about his video. Actually, I could ask him about what would be his perfect sort of group of characters in the clown world? Be it Olive Schultz or who else?
Oh God, Trudeau.
Trudeau, yeah, that's right, Trudeau.
I mean, look, Zelensky is now the Financial Times Person of the Year.
No,
I wouldn't be surprised.
Soon to be
Financial
Times.
Times
Person of the Year, probably. I mean, what can you say? It's there is, all of us, we say it all the time.
Omicron.
O'Brien. Yeah, there is no reverse gear with these.
No, well, I'll say that my favorite clown personage is Sanna Marin, because she's as clownish as the rest of them, but at least she's easy on the eyes. You know what I mean? But all the others, they're all just. I mean, I think that we have a full deck of clown world people. The twink in France, Rushi. Sunak in GB. I mean, they're all just laughable, and I don't think that any one of them beats any other.
Liz
But-
Truss was a real is getting missed.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, she is missed.
Yes.
She is
Yeah.
missed.
No, these are the people that are allegedly calling the shots. These are the people that are calling Putin. These are the people that are getting on the phone and speaking with Vladimir Putin or Xi Jinping.
Can't imagine why they're not convinced.
Macron. Yeah. I mean, these are the people that allegedly are making the policy for what's going on in Ukraine or what's gonna come down the road in China. These are the people.
Stoltenberg, Borrell,
It's shocking.
all of them.
Yeah. Anyway,
I want
Brett,
to. Yeah.
go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I just thought it was funny when the other Alexander mentioned the new Foreign Secretary in Britain, Mr. Cleverly. He sounded like something out of 1970s or something, typical
Yeah.
British name,
Yeah.
really weird.
The tragedy of the UK. I mean, I think we did a video today. We were talking about it, and Alexander mentioned again that when you look at the economic situation, it's bad in Europe, but the UK seems to be one step further down the
Yes.
bad.
Mm.
Yeah. Brett, it was great having you on. Look forward to seeing you on Sunday. Okay.
Okay, good.
Take care and sleep
Take care,
tight.
Brett.
It's late as all get out in Australia. So good.
Oh,
Get
yeah.
some sleep. Okay. Thanks so
Okay.
much for joining. Really appreciate it.
Take care,
All
bro.
right.
Yeah, no, like the UK seems to be going off the rails, and it's. I was living in the UK between 2017 and 2018, and even then it looked weary around the edges, afraid around the edges rather, and now it just seems to be worse. And I've been hearing statistics insofar as what they project to be the energy deficits. They're talking about 1 in 7 elderly people going cold this winter in the UK. Granted, the UK is not Ukraine, but still, I mean, it's unconscionable. And this is supposed to be a first world country. And it is far from first world. It's not even Banana Republic. It's, yeah.
The chairman, Gonzalo Bryan, I was reading an article the other day, the chairman of the Tories, I forgot his name. The chat will know. He was he was talking to there's strikes everywhere now that are coming up in the UK, right? And there's going to be a nurse's strike because they can't keep up with inflation. They can't make a respectable living wage. So and they're asking for help. And you know what he told them? He said, "Now is not the time." I'm paraphrasing. Now is not the time to ask for higher wages or to strike.
I saw it. And they cited
because
Putin.
exactly.
Oh my
You're
God.
helping Putin.
You're helping Putin for wanting better wages.
You're criticizing us. That means that you're a Russian bot. What the hell?
I mean, what's next? What is next? They're going to demand people hand over their entire bank accounts, and if you don't, you're with Putin. I mean, it's getting to ridiculous levels. And I think I want to ask both of you why you think the UK is a step ahead. Is it because they are just so much more enthusiastic about imperialism and they're just dumping money and military resources everywhere the US goes? The UK is right behind it. The most enthusiastic European country doing so. Is that do you think that's the reason why?
That's a good question. Why is the UK? Yeah, I mean they're intent. They have this bizarre relationship with the United States, if you ask me. Because it's sort of like that the little dog that is constantly trying to be with the big dog and sort of like pretend to itself that it is a big dog too when it really isn't. And I think that what happens is that the British overextend themselves the way that the Americans do, but the Americans are just simply bigger. And so it's not so noticeable when they're overextending themselves, whereas it's more noticeable when the Brits do it. I would say it's something along those lines. Alex, would you agree?
I agree. Yeah, they had a huge opportunity after Brexit, and they completely squandered that opportunity.
Yeah,
they could have been open for business, but they're so Boris Johnson, the leadership was so short-sighted. It had blinders on, and it didn't understand that there's a whole world out there for you, a whole world. But instead, what did they do? They ended up going right back to the European Union, to that same infrastructure, pretty much. But this time they're not even a member. So they're back in that same infrastructure, that same architecture, without even being able to sit at the table now. And and the other problem with the UK has to go to leadership. I know Alexander Gonzalo, you did a great show with Alexander, and you guys talked about leadership. The UK leadership, they lied to their people consistently, because I remember when the military operation started and all the sanctions were being rolled out, I remember Boris Johnson, he was saying very specifically to all the citizens of the UK, we can sanction Russia. We have no dependence on Russia. Really, it's minor. The gas, the oil, it's very, very minor. So we're going to be okay. Yeah, maybe Europe will have problems. We're going to be all right. So let's full speed ahead with the US and let's sanction everything about Russia. And lo and behold, they're very, very dependent on Russia, because you know better than anybody, Gonzalo. The things that Russia has is integrated in everything. You just can't sanction them and believe you're going to be okay.
Yeah. There's also an issue insofar as the Brits and the current situation in Ukraine is concerned, that the Brits, especially the leadership classes, have this visceral antagonism towards Russia. The Soviet Union, the Imperial Russia before them, I guess it goes all the way back to Crimea, but there is this chip on their shoulder that they have about Russia, which is really extraordinary. They have this just visceral dislike of them, that dislike and yet this weird dependency, because they were more than willing to take Russian money from Russian oligarchs, have them park their cash into properties in Southwest One, but at the same time they hate them. It's really a bizarre kind of relationship.
Sounds like the expat community here in Bangkok. It really does. Full circle.
It's just a bizarre thing that they, and you can argue that, oh, come on, how can an entire class of people, hate one particular country for whatever obscure reasons? Yeah, but it's the truth. I mean, it doesn't make any sense that they would have this vitriol that was expressed towards the Russians so vehemently. That's my thinking. Alex, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're spot on, and I think going back to what you said earlier, it's been the UK that has played the spoiler in trying to find a peace in Ukraine.
They're the ones who did it. Yeah. And so on that cheery note, we've gone on a little over 2 hours. It's been a delight, as always, having both of my guests. Alex Christoforou, the link to his channel is below. It's Alex Christoforou on YouTube and also on the Duran. You'll find the channel to the Duran on his YouTube channel below, so you shouldn't have any problem watching it. And I suggest you watch him on a daily basis, because he's got the best walk and talks of all of YouTube. It's always a delight. And Alex, my friend, thank you very much for coming. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Gonzalo. It's always great to be here.
Yeah, and my guest, Brian Berletic, thank you so much, Brian. He has the smartest military analysis on YouTube. Link to his channel, The New Atlas, is below in the description. Brian, thanks so much for coming.
It's a pleasure to be here and talk with both of you.
Guys, please stick around after the end of the broadcast so I can say a few words. Chat, I hope you enjoyed the show. And so why don't you give us a +1 to send out my guests, because I think that they richly deserved it. It was a hell of a lot of fun having them on. To everybody, thank you so much for watching, and catch you next time.